If this story touches your heart today, please share it with someone who needs hope. Sometimes, the most important people in our lives are those we meet by chance. Leave a comment telling us about an unexpected encounter that changed your life. The November wind whipped through the streets of Manhattan, carrying the first snowflakes of the season. Jonathan Porter watched the skyscrapers through the bulletproof window of his Bentley as his driver navigated the congested Fifth Avenue traffic. At 47, the founder and CEO of Porter Technologies commanded a technology empire valued at $22 billion. The digital security algorithms developed by his company protected governments, financial institutions, and corporations worldwide. The vehicle's interior was his private sanctuary. Italian hand-stitched leather, polished noble wood, acoustic insulation that transformed the city's chaos into a distant murmur. Jonathan checked his platinum Patek Philippe, a gift from the Japanese Prime Minister after a historic cybersecurity contract. He was 15 minutes late for the quarterly board meeting. His impeccably tailored Brioni suit contrasted with his slightly loosened tie, the only visible concession to the stress he carried. "Richard, how much longer?" he asked, without looking up from the financial documents on his tablet. "I'm afraid traffic is especially bad today, sir," replied the driver, a former military man who had worked for Jonathan for 12 years. "There's been an accident up ahead, and police are diverting all vehicles. I'm looking for an alternate route." Jonathan sighed. The board would wait for him, of course. As founder and majority shareholder, he wielded enough power to delay a meeting without significant consequences. Still, the delay bothered him. Punctuality had been one of the pillars of the success he had built virtually alone since the age of 23, when he developed his first security algorithm in the tiny apartment he shared with 2 college roommates. His phone rang for the 3rd time in 5 minutes, probably Rebecca, his executive assistant, trying to pinpoint his exact location. Jonathan silenced the device. The projected figures for the 4th quarter occupied his mind. The acquisition of the artificial intelligence startup needed to be finalized before the end of the fiscal year. Chinese investors had shown interest in the new quantum cryptography division. The vehicle came to a complete stop at another red light. The snow was falling more heavily now, transforming New York's frantic rhythm into an almost contemplative scene. Jonathan looked up from his documents, momentarily distracted by the world beyond the bubble of luxury and power he had created around himself. That's when his gaze captured the imposing white building across the avenue, Mount Sinai Children's Hospital, with its wide windows and modern architecture, contrasted with the surrounding commercial buildings. And there, on the 4th floor, Jonathan saw her for the first time. A small girl, who appeared to be no more than 9 years old, was looking out the window. She wore what seemed to be a colorful hat that completely covered her head, the kind he had seen in childhood cancer awareness campaigns. The child wasn't smiling or crying, just observing the outside world with an expression that combined resignation and longing. There was something in that gaze that pierced through Jonathan's carefully constructed armor. For a moment, it was as if time stood still. The city noise, work concerns, the responsibilities of commanding a corporate empire, everything disappeared. All that remained was the invisible connection between 2 gazes that met by chance across space. The man in his luxury car and the child confined to a hospital room. The traffic light turned green, but Jonathan didn't register the change. His eyes remained fixed on the hospital window, on the small figure who now rested her hand against the glass, as if trying to touch the outside world. "Richard," said Jonathan, his voice sounding strange even to himself. "Stop the car." "Sir?" The driver looked in the rearview mirror, confused. "Park somewhere. Right here, if possible." The board meeting Can wait. Richard, accustomed to his boss's determination when making a decision, found a spot a few yards away. Before he could ask anything, Jonathan had already exited the vehicle, the cold wind whipping his cashmere coat as he crossed the avenue toward the hospital. The contrast between November's freezing air and the warmth of the hospital lobby was like a physical shock. Jonathan stopped momentarily, suddenly feeling out of place amid the constant movement of doctors, nurses, patients, and visitors. The smell of antiseptic mingled with the aroma of coffee from the small cafeteria in the corner. Monitors displayed information about departments and visiting hours. What was he doing here? Jonathan couldn't explain the impulse that had brought him to this place. In more than 2 decades building his empire, he had never acted so impulsively. His decisions were always calculated, based on detailed risk and benefit analyses. Yet here he was, standing in the middle of a children's hospital lobby, moved by nothing but the gaze of a child he didn't know. He approached the information desk, where a middle-aged woman with gray hair was typing on an outdated computer. "May I help you, sir?" she asked, studying the clearly wealthy man before her. Jonathan hesitated. What would he say? That he'd seen a girl through the window and felt an inexplicable connection? He would sound like a lunatic, perhaps even someone with questionable intentions. I'm interested in learning more about the hospital's pediatric programs," he finally answered, "particularly the work done with oncology patients." The receptionist observed him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "Do you have a family member admitted here?" "No, actually." Jonathan paused, organizing his thoughts. "My name is Jonathan Porter. I'm considering directing some of my foundation's resources toward programs supporting hospitalized children. I'd like to learn about the work done here before making a decision." It wasn't completely false. The Porter Foundation distributed millions annually to various causes, although Jonathan rarely personally involved himself with the beneficiary institutions. He delegated that task to the foundation team, preferring the familiar environment of numbers and strategies to the human contact that philanthropy required. 10 minutes and several verifications later, Jonathan was greeted by Dr. Emily Winters, director of the Pediatric Oncology Department. A woman in her early 50s, with short gray hair and a posture that emanated competence and compassion in equal measure. "Mr. Porter, it's a pleasure to meet you," she said, extending her hand in a firm handshake. "Your reputation precedes you. Our fundraising department has tried to schedule a meeting with your foundation several times over the past few years." "Has it?" Jonathan didn't know that. The details of the foundation's operation rarely reached his desk. "I apologize for that. Perhaps it's time to correct the situation." "Better late than never," replied the doctor with a discreet smile. "Would you like to start our tour with the laboratory or the treatment facilities?" "Actually," Jonathan chose his words carefully, "I'm particularly interested in learning more about long-term patients, how the hospital addresses not just the medical, but the emotional needs of these children." Dr. Winters studied him for a moment, as if assessing his intentions. "Interesting. Most potential donors want to see expensive equipment and cutting-edge technology. The human aspect is rarely the first concern." "Let's say I'm trying to broaden my perspective," Jonathan replied. The doctor nodded and began guiding him through the corridors, explaining the various psychological, educational, and entertainment support programs offered to children in prolonged treatment. She spoke about volunteers who read stories, teachers who provided adapted classes, and therapists who used art and music to aid in the healing process. Jonathan listened with genuine attention, but part of his mind remained focused on finding the girl he had seen through the window. When they reached the 4th floor, his eyes discreetly examined each room they passed. "Our biggest challenge," Dr. Winters continued, "is providing a sense of normalcy in an inherently abnormal environment. Children need to play, learn, develop emotionally even while fighting serious illnesses. As they passed a room with the door slightly ajar, Jonathan finally saw her. The same girl, now sitting on her hospital bed, a colorful book open on her knees. The blue hat with small yellow stars completely covered her head. Even in profile, Jonathan could see how much thinner her face was than would be natural for her age, her pale skin contrasting with dark eyes that seemed to absorb everything around them. "And this patient?" he asked, interrupting the doctor's explanation about a new virtual reality program for immobilized children. Dr. Winters followed his gaze, a curious expression forming on her face. "That's Sophia Martinez, one of our long-term patients." Jonathan studied the girl for a moment. There was a quietness about her, a dignity that seemed incompatible with her age and situation. "How long has she been here?" "Almost 5 months," replied the doctor. "Mr. Porter, I understand your interest, but I must remind you of our strict policy regarding patient privacy, especially children." "Of course, I completely understand," Jonathan quickly replied. "She just caught my attention. She seems lonely." Something softened in Dr. Winters's expression. "Sophia is an extraordinary child. She has faced treatment with impressive maturity." After a pause, she added, "And yes, unfortunately, she does spend a lot of time alone." "Don't her parents visit regularly?" "Her mother, Maria, visits whenever she can. She's a nurse at Presbyterian Hospital and works double shifts to keep up with the bills. Sophia has been her only priority since she became ill." The doctor made a significant pause before continuing. "As for her father, he has never been present in Sophia's life." Jonathan nodded, feeling a strange affinity with the situation. His own father had abandoned the family when Jonathan was only 8, leaving his mother to raise 3 children alone. The difference, he thought bitterly, was that his mother had the relative luck of not having to deal with a seriously ill child, in addition to financial difficulties. "Do you have a visitor program? Volunteers who keep the children company during their hospitalization?" "Yes, we have a structured program," replied Dr. Winters, "but we always need more people willing to commit their time regularly, especially for cases like Sophia's, with prolonged hospitalizations. Sporadic visits can do more harm than good. Children in this situation need consistency." Jonathan reflected for a moment, surprised by the direction his thoughts were taking. "Would it be possible? I'd like to meet her, if appropriate." Dr. Winters studied him with renewed interest. "This is quite unusual, Mr. Porter. Normally, our volunteers go through a training process before interacting with patients. May I ask the reason for this specific interest in Sophia?" It was a reasonable question, but Jonathan didn't have a reasonable answer to offer. How to explain something that even he didn't fully understand? "Honestly, I can't say for sure," he finally admitted. "I saw her through the window while my car was stopped in traffic. Something in the way she looked at the world outside touched something in me." To his surprise, the doctor smiled slightly. "In over 25 years treating children with cancer, I've learned not to underestimate these inexplicable connections. Not everything in medicine or in life can be quantified or rationally explained." She paused, considering. "If you're really interested, I can check if Sophia would be willing to receive a brief visit. She has the right to refuse, naturally." "I would appreciate that," replied Jonathan, "and I promise to respect any decision she makes." Dr. Winters asked him to wait in the small sitting area on the floor while she spoke with Sophia. Jonathan sat down, feeling strangely nervous. He was a man accustomed to commanding rooms full of executives and negotiating billion-dollar contracts, but the prospect of meeting a sick child left him genuinely anxious. His phone vibrated, now messages not only from Rebecca, but also from the board chairman, asking about his whereabouts. The meeting had started 30 minutes ago. For a moment, Jonathan considered leaving, returning to the familiar world of spreadsheets, graphs, and corporate decisions. What was he doing here, after all? What difference could he make in this child's life? And why did it suddenly matter? Before he could decide, Dr. Winters returned. "Sophia has agreed to meet you. Just a few minutes, if you don't mind. She's having a good day, but still tires easily." Sophia's room was similar to others on the floor. Walls in soft tones trying to disguise the clinical nature of the environment, a large window offering a view of the city, medical equipment strategically positioned to appear less invasive. The only personalization was a small mural of star and planet stickers attached to the wall near the bed. Sophia was sitting more upright now, her book closed on her legs, covered by the sheet stamped with a pattern similar to her hat. Jonathan noticed her thin arms, more fragile than they should be, her pallor accentuated by the fluorescent light. But it was her eyes that captured his attention, large, dark, and incredibly alert, observing him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Sophia, this is Mr. Porter," introduced Dr. Winters. "He would like to talk with you for a few minutes. I'll be down the hall if you need anything, okay?" The doctor left, leaving the door slightly ajar as per hospital protocol. Jonathan approached hesitantly, suddenly aware of his expensive suit and executive appearance, so out of place in that environment. "Hello, Sophia. You can call me Jonathan if you prefer." The girl observed him for a few moments before responding in a clear voice that was firmer than he expected. "Why do you want to talk to me? You don't look like a doctor or a regular volunteer." The frankness of the question caught Jonathan by surprise, though it shouldn't have. Children, especially those facing serious illnesses, often developed keen perception and a tendency to dispense with adult social conventions. "I'm not a doctor, nor a volunteer. At least, not yet," he admitted, cautiously approaching the chair positioned beside the bed. "May I sit?" Sophia nodded, still studying him with those intensely observant eyes. "I saw you through the window a little while ago, while my car was stopped in traffic," explained Jonathan, opting for simple honesty. "You were looking outside and, well, it seemed like you might appreciate some company." The girl considered the explanation as if assessing its sincerity. "That's strange." "I know," Jonathan agreed with a small smile. "It's not something I would normally do." "Then why did you do it?" The direct question demanded an equally sincere answer. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Maybe because the way you were looking out the window seemed familiar to me somehow." Sophia processed this for a moment. "Have you been sick like me?" "Not like you," replied Jonathan, "but I have felt separated from the world outside, as if I were observing life happening without really being part of it." Something changed in the girl's expression. A recognition, perhaps. "Yes, that's exactly how I feel sometimes. The people out there have no idea what it's like to be in here." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Jonathan noticed the book in her lap, an illustrated edition of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. "Harry Potter?" he asked, indicating the book. Sophia's face subtly lit up. "It's my favorite. I'm reading it for the third time." "It's an excellent book to reread. What's your favorite part?" "When Harry discovers he's a wizard, and that there's a whole world he never knew about," Sophia replied without hesitation. "That he's not just the weird boy everyone thought. A world that was always there, just waiting to be discovered," Jonathan agreed. The conversation flowed surprisingly well after that. Jonathan discovered that Sophia loved astronomy and dreamed of becoming an astronomer or astrophysicist someday. She was an avid reader, particularly of fantasy and science fiction. Worlds where everything is possible, as she explained. She spoke about planets and constellations with genuine enthusiasm that momentarily masked her condition. Time passed faster than Jonathan realized. When the nurse entered to administer medication, he checked his watch with surprise. He had spent almost an hour there. The board meeting had certainly concluded without him, something that had never happened before. "I need to go now," he said, standing up. "But I'd like to come back to visit you again, if that's okay with you." Sophia seemed genuinely surprised. "You want to come back?" "If you'll allow it." A small smile appeared on her face, the first Jonathan had seen. The transformation was subtle, but significant, like the sun finally emerging through persistent clouds. "Okay. Could you bring a book about stars next time? Mine is at home, and Mom is so busy she always forgets." "Consider it done," replied Jonathan. "I know exactly the perfect book." Upon leaving the hospital, the snow had stopped, leaving the city covered by a white blanket that would soon be stained by constant traffic. Jonathan found Richard still patiently waiting in the Bentley. "To the office, sir?" asked the driver, opening the door. Jonathan hesitated, checking his phone. 17 missed calls, 28 unread messages. The workday was effectively lost. "No, Richard. Home, please." He paused. "And can we stop at a bookstore on the way?" The next day, contrary to all expectations of his team, Jonathan completely reorganized his schedule. He canceled 2 international meetings, postponed a presentation to investors, and delegated his participation in a technology conference to his vice president. In the afternoon, he returned to the hospital carrying not just 1, but 3 different books on astronomy, including a stellar atlas with spectacular photographs from the Hubble Space Telescope. The expression of genuine delight on Sophia's face when he entered her room with the books evoked a strange sensation in Jonathan. A warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in years, possibly decades. A feeling of having done something that truly mattered, not just for his bank account or the company's market value. This was the beginning of a pattern that completely baffled the executive team at Porter Technologies. The CEO, known for his meticulously structured schedule and unwavering commitment to work, began visiting the hospital regularly, usually in the late afternoon. His assistants were instructed to block this period in his calendar, with no exceptions. During his 3rd visit, Jonathan met Maria Martinez, Sophia's mother. She was a woman in her 30s, with the same expressive dark eyes as her daughter, though hers were marked by deep circles that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. Even wearing the simple nurse's uniform, she carried herself with a dignity that Jonathan immediately respected. "Mr. Porter," she said, extending her hand in greeting. "Sophia has been talking a lot about your visits." "Please call me Jonathan," he replied, "and I hope they've been positive comments." "Very positive. In fact, they're the most excited I've seen her in weeks." Maria hesitated, her expression becoming more cautious. "Although, I must admit, I was surprised. It's not common for someone like you to be interested in regularly visiting a child in a hospital." "Sit." The implication was clear. Why would a busy billionaire dedicate his precious time to a girl with no connection to him or his company? "I understand your surprise," Jonathan replied sincerely. "And if I were in your position, I'd probably have the same doubts. I can only say that meeting Sophia has been enlightening for me. I hope you don't mind my visits." Maria studied his face for a moment, as if looking for signs of hidden motives. Apparently satisfied with what she saw, she relaxed slightly. "I don't mind. In fact, I'm grateful. I work 12-hour shifts, often consecutive days. Every moment I can't be with Sophia is painful. Knowing she has company, especially someone who shares her interest in astronomy. Her voice briefly faltered. Thank you. In the following weeks, Jonathan gradually integrated into Sophia's routine. He learned when her best times were, usually between treatments, when fatigue was less intense. He discovered her favorite books, her curiosities about the universe, her dream of one day visiting the Hubble Space Observatory. He brought a small portable telescope that could be used from the hospital window on the rare clear nights in Manhattan. Unlike many executives who practiced philanthropy with a distant and impersonal approach, Jonathan found himself genuinely invested in Sophia's well-being. It wasn't just about writing checks or making donations. It was about being present, listening to her stories, answering her questions about stars and galaxies, or simply sitting in silence when she was too tired to talk. It was during the third week of visits that Jonathan discovered the complete truth about Sophia's condition. After one of his regular visits, Dr. Winters approached him in the hallway. "Mr. Porter, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" In her office, the doctor was direct. "First, I want to thank you for what you've been doing for Sophia. The difference in her mood since you began visiting her regularly is remarkable." "There's no need for thanks," replied Jonathan. "Sophia is an extraordinary child. I think I've learned more from her than she has from me." Doctor Winters nodded, her expression becoming grave. "Mr. Porter, there's something I need to share with you. With Maria's permission. She feels you've earned the right to know." The doctor paused, carefully choosing her words. "The type of leukemia Sophia has is particularly aggressive and rare. We've tried various traditional protocols over the past few months, but she's not responding as expected," completed Jonathan, feeling a tightness in his chest. "Exactly. The latest tests show that the cancer cells continue to proliferate despite intensive chemotherapy. We're essentially exhausting the conventional options covered by Maria's insurance." Jonathan processed the information slowly. During his visits, Sophia rarely talked about her treatment or condition. She preferred to discuss stars, books, or the small science projects he brought to distract her. Although it was obvious she was ill, the severity of her condition hadn't been completely apparent to Jonathan. "What are the alternatives?" he finally asked. "There is an experimental treatment that could help her," replied Dr. Winters. "A modified immunotherapy developed specifically for cases like hers. The preliminary results are extremely promising. However, it's not covered by insurance," concluded Jonathan, immediately understanding. "Unfortunately not. We're talking about $420,000 just for the medication, not considering the associated procedures, prolonged hospitalization, and post-treatment care. Maria has already mortgaged her home, sold practically everything of value she owned. She's working 2 jobs and still—" "How much time does Sophia have without this treatment?" Jonathan felt the question form in his mind and leave his lips before he could contain it. Dr. Winters' expression became even more somber. "Based on the current progression, a few weeks, maybe a month. With the experimental medication, the chances of complete remission are significantly better. The initial clinical trials show a success rate of 75% in cases similar to hers." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with the weight of a young life at stake. Jonathan felt something change within him. A clarity, a certainty he rarely experienced outside the business world. "I want to fund the treatment," he said, "fully." "Mr. Porter, that's extraordinarily generous, but the money will be available tomorrow. Please initiate all necessary preparations immediately." Jonathan paused, considering. "And, if possible, I'd prefer this to be handled discreetly. I don't want Sophia or Maria to feel somehow indebted to me." Dr. Winters studied him at length. "May I ask why you're doing this? You've only known Sophia for a few weeks." Jonathan thought about the question. Why was he doing this? The amount was insignificant for someone with his fortune, less than he had spent on his last yacht. But he knew it wasn't about the money. "When I was approximately Sophia's age, I became seriously ill with pneumonia," he finally said. "My mother worked 3 jobs after my father abandoned us. We didn't have adequate insurance. A doctor, I never knew his full name, just Dr. Michael, took care of me even when the money ran out. Weeks later, when my mother finally managed to scrape together some money and tried to pay part of the bill, she discovered it had been paid in full." Jonathan paused, recalling the story his mother had told so many times during his childhood. When she asked why, the doctor simply said that some debts can never be repaid directly, only passed forward. "Tut, I think I finally understand what he meant." The following week, Sophia began the experimental treatment. Dr. Winters had carefully organized the documentation to make it appear as a special case approved by insurance, a half-truth that would spare Maria's pride while ensuring Sophia received the necessary care. Jonathan transferred the funds through an anonymous donation specifically directed to the pediatric oncology program. The first days were extremely difficult. The experimental medication, although promising, had severe side effects: intense nausea, high fever, muscle pains that made Sophia curl up under the sheets. Often, Jonathan would arrive for his visits only to find her sleeping, too exhausted to talk or even acknowledge his presence. On those days, he simply sat beside her bed, working silently on his tablet or reading aloud passages from the astronomy books he had brought. He didn't know if she could hear him in the moments of semi-consciousness between medication cycles, but he continued anyway, describing distant nebulae and stellar systems as if the words could transport her away from the immediate suffering. Maria, initially surprised by the sudden approval of the experimental treatment due to exceptional circumstances, the official explanation provided by the hospital, began to notice the gradual transformation in Jonathan. The meticulously organized and always impeccable executive became a constant presence in the hospital environment. His perfectly tailored suit gave way to more casual clothes, still obviously expensive, but chosen for comfort during the long hours sitting in the uncomfortable chair beside Sophia's bed. He canceled international teleconferences without hesitation when they coincided with important procedures. One night, when Sophia had a particularly severe reaction to the medication, Jonathan remained at the hospital for 22 consecutive hours, alternating watch shifts with Maria so she could rest for a few hours at home. "You have a company to run," Maria said during one of those nights, as they both drank weak coffee from the hospital cafeteria. "You can't keep canceling important commitments like this." Jonathan observed the dark liquid in his paper cup. "You know the difference between running a billion-dollar company and sitting beside a sick child?" He paused, meeting Maria's eyes. "The company will continue functioning even if I'm not there. I've tested that theory in the last few weeks. My executives are making perfectly adequate decisions without my constant supervision." "And that doesn't bother you? Discovering you're not as indispensable as you thought?" An unexpected smile appeared on Jonathan's face. "Actually, it's curiously liberating." As the weeks passed, the executives at Porter Technologies tried to adapt to the new reality. Rebecca, who had been Jonathan's assistant for 9 years, found herself suddenly with more autonomy and responsibility than she had ever imagined. Michael Davidson, the COO who had always operated under constant supervision, took on several executive decisions that previously would have waited for the CEO's approval. The most significant transformation, however, was happening within Jonathan himself. For the first time in more than 2 decades, he wasn't primarily defined by his work. The hours spent at the hospital with Sophia offered a drastically different perspective on what truly mattered. "How did you become so rich?" Sophia asked one afternoon, when she was finally beginning to recover from the more severe effects of the treatment. Jonathan, who was organizing a new set of books he had brought, smiled at the frankness of the question. "I developed security algorithms that protect important information. Banks, governments, companies, they all need to keep their data secure." "And does that make you happy? Being rich?" The question caught him off guard, not because of its simplicity, but because no one had asked him this directly in years, possibly decades. People assumed billionaires were automatically happy, or that the question was irrelevant given so much privilege. "It's not the wealth itself," he replied after a moment of genuine reflection. "It's what it represents, the validation that I created something useful, something the world values. For a long time, I confused that validation with happiness." "And now?" Jonathan observed the girl before him. So young, and yet able to formulate questions that many adults avoided. "Now, I'm beginning to think that maybe I've been pursuing the wrong metric." A month after starting the experimental treatment, the doctors began to see the first signs of significant progress. Blood tests showed a reduction in cancer cells. The white blood cell count was gradually normalizing. Sophia's body, weakened by months of conventional treatments that had failed, was finally demonstrating a response capacity to the new protocol. She began to regain her energy, managing to sit up in bed for longer periods. Her appetite improved slightly, allowing her to recover some of the weight she had lost. Small victories that seemed monumental in the context of her struggle. "It seems we've finally found the right path," commented Dr. Winters during a consultation with Maria, Jonathan silently present in the corner of the room at Sophia's request. "The tumor markers are consistently decreasing. If this trend continues, we can consider reducing the medication intensity in the coming weeks." Maria covered her face with her hands, years of accumulated tension finally finding an escape valve in silent tears. Jonathan remained motionless, respecting the intensity of the moment. For Maria, these weren't just good medical news. They were the difference between a future with her daughter and one without her. With Sophia's gradual improvement, Jonathan began bringing small educational projects to occupy her during visits. Adapted astronomy kits, simple scientific experiments that could be conducted in the hospital room, even a small digital planetarium that projected constellations on the ceiling at night. For the hospital staff, the relationship that developed between the billionaire and the small patient was something that defied all expectations. It wasn't the typical philanthropic visit for photos or the distant donation without personal involvement. It was a genuine connection, built day by day through conversations, shared books, and comfortable silences. 6 weeks after the start of the experimental treatment, Dr. Winters entered the room with an expression she couldn't disguise. Sophia was sitting in her bed, drawing constellations in a special notebook Jonathan had given her, while he reviewed some emails on his tablet in the armchair beside her. "I have news," announced the doctor, her voice carrying an emotion rarely demonstrated. "The latest tests are, well, they're extraordinary. We no longer detect cancer cells in Sophia's blood or bone marrow." The colored pencil in the girl's hand remained motionless on the paper. Maria, who had just arrived for a visit after her shift, dropped her bag on the floor. "Does that mean?" Sophia's voice was just a whisper, as if she were afraid to complete the question. "It means the treatment worked better than any of us dared to hope. You're in complete remission, Sophia." The silence that followed was briefly broken by a sob from Maria, before she enveloped her daughter in a careful embrace. Jonathan remained seated, a strange sensation expanding in his chest, something he would eventually recognize as genuine joy, unlinked to professional achievements or material acquisitions. 3 weeks later, after a battery of confirmatory tests and continuation of the treatment in reduced dosage to ensure that no remaining cancer cells survived, Sophia finally received discharge from the hospital. After almost 6 months of continuous hospitalization, she would be going home. Jonathan was present when Sophia walked out of the building for the first time in half a year, supported by her mother's arm. The January sun, weak but present, illuminated her face as she deeply breathed the city's cold air, no longer filtered through hospital windows. Her blue hat with stars, now more an item of comfort than necessity, remained firmly on her head, although small tufts of dark hair were already beginning to grow back. What Maria and Sophia didn't know, yet, was that home would no longer be the small apartment in the Bronx they had left months ago. Jonathan had discreetly acquired a comfortable 3-bedroom apartment near the hospital, facilitating the regular follow-up consultations Sophia would need for at least another year. The place had been completely furnished and decorated, including a special room for Sophia with a fiber-optic ceiling that simulated the starry sky. He had also established a substantial educational fund, ensuring that Sophia could pursue her dream of studying astronomy at any university she chose when the time came. The entire arrangement was legally structured through the Porter Foundation, avoiding the appearance of direct personal charity that might embarrass Maria. When Maria discovered the complete truth, both about the treatment and the apartment, she confronted Dr. Winters, who finally revealed the extent of Jonathan's involvement. "Why did you do this?" Maria asked Jonathan directly when she met him the next day, in the new apartment he had helped prepare. "We are nothing to you. Not family, not employees, not even long-time acquaintances. Why invest so much in a child you barely know?" Jonathan looked out the apartment window, observing the nearby park where Sophia, now with enough energy for short walks, was examining the snow-covered trees with the natural curiosity that illness had temporarily suppressed. "I spent 25 years building a company," he finally replied. "I created something the world considers valuable, something that generates billions in annual revenue and employs thousands of people. But in all that time, I never did something that really mattered to me as a person, not just as a businessman." He turned to Maria, with an expression that mixed certainty and vulnerability. "Helping Sophia isn't charity or strategic philanthropy. It's reconnection with values I forgot long ago, with the kind of impact that no corporate acquisition or company merger could ever offer." Maria studied his face for a long moment. "Does she remind you of someone?" "Not exactly. She reminds me of possibilities. Of a world where value isn't measured only in dollars or market shares." In the months that followed, while Sophia continued her recovery with regular consultations and maintenance medication, Jonathan officially established the Window of Hope Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated exclusively to funding experimental treatments for children with cancer whose families lacked resources. The foundation's first official center was built adjacent to Mount Sinai Children's Hospital, with Sophia Martinez eventually accepting the position of Director of Patient Relations, a job that allowed flexible hours and utilized her experience both as a nurse and as the mother of a childhood cancer survivor. The restructuring of Porter Technologies surprised market analysts and investors. Jonathan maintained his position as CEO, but delegated several executive responsibilities, allowing him to dedicate 40% of his time to the foundation. Contrary to all pessimistic predictions, the company's shares didn't suffer. In fact, the new distributed leadership structure proved more agile and innovative, resulting in an increase in market value. At his desk, both in the corporate office and at the new foundation headquarters, Jonathan kept a framed photograph. In it, Sophia smiled widely on her first day back at school, 3 months after being discharged from the hospital. Her hair, now growing in short, dark curls, framed a face that had regained its childlike vibrancy. The blue hat with stars, now worn on the side as a favorite accessory rather than a medical necessity, completed the image. Her eyes, previously marked by the resignation Jonathan had seen through that hospital window on a November afternoon, now shone with hope and future possibilities. The photograph served as a daily reminder that sometimes the greatest opportunities for personal transformation appear in the most unexpected moments and places, through casual encounters that, in retrospect, seem almost predestined. For Jonathan Porter, the true value of his billions wasn't in the bank accounts or global properties, but in the capacity to make a tangible difference in the life of a child who, by chance, was looking through a hospital window on an ordinary November afternoon. In a world where success and value are frequently measured in numbers, Jonathan had found something that transcended any spreadsheet or financial report: the profound satisfaction of seeing Sophia run again, study again, dream again about the stars they both so admired. The Window of Hope Foundation quickly grew beyond Jonathan's initial vision. Within 18 months, it had established partnerships with 12 major children's hospitals across the country, providing funding for experimental treatments to more than 100 children whose families couldn't afford them. Maria's first-hand experience as both a healthcare professional and the mother of a cancer survivor made her uniquely qualified to guide families through the complex emotional and logistical challenges they faced. Sophia's recovery continued steadily. Her hair grew back fully, darker and curlier than before. "My battle curls," she called them, with the resilience that had impressed Jonathan from the beginning. She returned to school, excelling particularly in science classes, and joined an astronomy club where she quickly became known for her encyclopedic knowledge of constellations. On her 10th birthday, 6 months after leaving the hospital, Jonathan arranged a special surprise. With proper medical clearance and careful planning, he took Sophia and Maria to the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History for a private showing. As the dome darkened and the universe expanded above them, Jonathan watched Sophia's face illuminate with wonder and joy, the same expression he had once seen reflected in stock prices and acquisition deals, but infinitely more meaningful. "Do you know what I thought about when I was looking out that hospital window?" Sophia asked him later that evening, as they shared birthday cake in the apartment that had become their home. "What?" Jonathan asked, genuinely curious. "I wasn't just looking at the people or the buildings," she explained, her eyes reflecting wisdom beyond her years. "I was looking at the tiny bit of sky I could see between the buildings. I kept thinking that somewhere up there were all these stars and planets, and someday I would see them again. That the universe was so much bigger than my hospital room." Jonathan nodded, understanding completely. "And now you will." The universe indeed proved larger than either of them had imagined. 3 years later, Sophia's science project on stellar spectroscopy won national recognition, featured in major scientific publications, and catching the attention of NASA's Educational Outreach Program. Jonathan watched with pride as she developed from a patient into a student, from a child fighting for survival into a young person with boundless potential. The Porter Technologies Board eventually adapted to their CEO's new priorities. The company continued to thrive under the more distributed leadership model, with Jonathan focusing on strategic vision rather than day-to-day operations. To everyone's surprise, including Jonathan's, the company's market value increased by 32% in the 3 years following his lifestyle change. You've found something most people spend their entire lives searching for: Rebecca, his longtime assistant, commented during a rare quiet moment between meetings. A purpose beyond success. Jonathan considered her words thoughtfully. I had success backward, he replied. I thought it was about accumulation. More money, more market share, more recognition. But real success is about distribution. What you give, not what you gather. On cold November days, when the first snow begins to fall on Manhattan, Jonathan still occasionally asks his driver to take the route past Mount Sinai Children's Hospital. He looks up at the windows, thinking of the children inside looking out, each one carrying dreams and hopes beyond their temporary confinement. And each time, he remembers how a single glance, one moment of truly seeing another person, can change everything. The Window of Hope Foundation continues its mission today, having helped over 500 children access life-saving experimental treatments. Every year, on the anniversary of that first snowfall and chance encounter, Jonathan receives dozens of photos from families across the country. Children who once looked out hospital windows now running, playing, growing, learning, and dreaming. And on his desk at both offices, the photograph of Sophia on her first day back at school remains, a constant reminder that sometimes our most important contributions have nothing to do with our job titles or bank accounts, but with the simple human connection that begins when we truly see one another. If this story touched your heart today, remember, there are children like Sophia in hospitals around the country, waiting for a connection that transcends institutional walls. Sometimes, a glance through a window can transform not just one life, but two. Share this story with someone who needs inspiration, and leave a comment about an unexpected moment that forever changed your perspective.